1964, a small town in southern Brazil called Candido Godoy. A German doctor arrives, speaks broken Portuguese, pays in cash, no one asks questions. He stays for months, maybe years, visiting pregnant women, offering medical care, giving them vitamins and injections. The townspeople think he's generous. A good doctor helping poor families. His real name is Josef Mengele, the angel of death from Auschwitz. And something very strange starts happening in this town. The birth rate of twins explodes. Not doubles, not triples, quadruples. Normally, twins occur in about 5% of births worldwide. In Candido Godoy, it jumps to 20%. Blue-eyed, blonde-haired twins, born to families with no history of twins. Today, this town is known as the Land of Twins, and nobody can fully explain why, but here's what we do know. Mengele spent years at Auschwitz conducting twin experiments. Over 1,500 pairs of twins, most of them children, most of them murdered. He was obsessed with understanding how twins form, because if you can create twins at will, if you can manipulate genetics to produce specific traits, blonde hair, blue eyes, intelligence, then you can build a master race. And here's the terrifying part. Mengele wasn't working alone. He was part of a massive Nazi program that didn't end when Hitler died in 1945. Because as Germany was losing the war, as the Allies closed in, the Nazis launched a secret operation called Aktion Feuerland. Operation Land of Fire. They sent U-boats loaded with gold, documents, and scientists to Argentina. They established compounds in Patagonia, hired local officials, built laboratories, and according to declassified documents released just months ago, they continued their eugenic experiments for decades after the war. This is the story of the secret Nazi plan to create the Fourth Reich. Not through military conquest, but through genetics to clone Hitler, to breed a master race to rise again, and the scariest part? Some of it actually happened when World War II ended in May 1945. We thought it was over, Hitler dead in his bunker. The Third Reich defeated, the nightmare finished. But what if I told you that the Nazis saw the end coming years before it happened? That starting in 1942, Hitler's private secretary Martin Bormann began moving Nazi wealth out of Germany, gold stolen from Holocaust victims, art looted from museums, currency from conquered nations, all of it transported secretly to South America, Operation Aktion Feuerland, documented by German records, confirmed by U-boat logs, verified by Argentine intelligence files released in 2024. 6 U-boats, maybe more, sailed from Norway in early May 1945. Just days before Germany surrendered, 2 of them, U-530 and U-977, surrendered to Argentine authorities months later in July, their crews refusing to explain where they'd been or what they'd carried. The Argentine Navy, under orders from President Juan Perón, stopped attacking German U-boats near their coast. Why? Because Perón was a fascist sympathizer who saw an opportunity. He offered the Nazis sanctuary in exchange for their wealth, their technology, and their expertise. But it wasn't just about money. The Nazis brought something else to Argentina, their scientists, doctors who'd conducted experiments in concentration camps, geneticists who'd sterilized thousands, eugenicists who believed they could breed a superior human. And at the center of it all was one obsession: creating more Nazis, not through recruiting, not through propaganda, but through genetics, through selective breeding, through cloning. Now, let me be clear. The Nazis didn't have the technology to clone humans in the 1940s. Nobody did, but they were trying, they were experimenting. And according to survivors and declassified documents, they got further than most people realize. This is that story to understand the Nazi cloning plan. you need to understand their obsession with eugenics, the idea that you can improve the human race by controlling who has children. It sounds insane today, but in the early 1900s, eugenics was mainstream science, taught at universities funded by governments, supported by intellectuals. In America, California passed forced sterilization laws in 1909. By 1933, over 60,000 Americans had been forcibly sterilized. Disabled people, poor people, anyone deemed unfit. The Nazis studied American eugenics programs. They loved them. When Hitler came to power in 1933, he immediately passed the law for the prevention of hereditarily diseased offspring. Copied almost directly from California's law, within 1 year, Germany was sterilizing 5,000 people per month. But Hitler didn't just want to prevent inferior people from reproducing. He wanted to create superior people. Enter the Lebensborn program. Launched in 1935, Lebensborn, German for Fount of Life, was an SS organization designed to increase the Aryan population. The program had 2 goals. 1. Encourage SS officers to have as many children as possible. 2. Provide support for racially pure, unmarried mothers. Himmler, head of the SS, personally oversaw Lebensborn. He believed Germany needed to produce millions of Aryan children to populate the conquered territories. Lebensborn homes were set up across Germany and occupied territories. Young German women, blonde, blue-eyed, racially pure, were encouraged to get pregnant by SS officers, no marriage required. The state would care for the child. By 1945, Lebensborn had facilitated the birth of over 8,000 children in Germany, and thousands more in Norway, France, and other occupied countries. But here's where it gets darker. Lebensborn also kidnapped children in Poland, Czechoslovakia, and other Eastern European countries. Nazi officials would identify blonde, blue-eyed children, test them for racial purity, then steal them from their families. These children, estimated at 200,000 to 300,000, were sent to Germany, given German names, and raised as Aryans. Most never saw their biological families again. This was eugenics in action, not just preventing bad genetics, but actively creating and stealing good genetics. But breeding children the old-fashioned way was slow. It took decades to see results. So the Nazis started experimenting with faster methods. May 1943, Dr. Josef Mengele arrives at Auschwitz. He's 32 years old, trained in genetics and anthropology. A protege of Ottmar von Verschuer, one of Germany's leading geneticists. Mengele's mission, officially, is to serve as a camp doctor, selecting who lives and who dies from the trains of deportees arriving daily. But unofficially, Mengele has another agenda. He wants to unlock the secret of twin births. Because if you can make women reliably produce twins, you double your Aryan birth rate. And if you can control which traits those twins inherit, you can design the master race. Mengele stood at the selection ramp shouting, "Zwilling! Zwilling! Twins! Twins!" Any set of twins, especially identical twins, were immediately pulled aside, spared from the gas chambers, sent to special barracks. Between 1943 and 1945, Mengele experimented on over 1,500 pairs of twins. Most under age 13, the experiments were horrific. He injected chemicals directly into their eyes, trying to change their color to blue. He performed surgeries without anesthesia to see if twins felt pain the same way. He infected one twin with diseases to see if the other would get sick. He measured every part of their bodies, took endless blood samples, extracted organs, dissected them after they died. Eva Moses Kor, one of the few survivors, later testified that Mengele injected her with unknown substances that made her violently ill. She remembers being strapped to a table, measured, photographed, treated like a lab specimen. Most of Mengele's twin subjects died. Only about 200 survived the war. But Mengele's notes, his data, his tissue samples, he sent all of it back to Berlin, to the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute, where his mentor von Verschuer was director. This wasn't rogue experimentation. This was funded, institutional, scientific research. And when the war ended, Mengele fled. He didn't destroy his research, he took it with him. Now here's where the story takes a turn into something that sounds like science fiction, but isn't. Because in 1960, Israeli agents kidnapped Adolf Eichmann, architect of the Holocaust, from Argentina. During his interrogation, Eichmann mentioned something strange. He said Bormann had established genetic research facilities in Patagonia. He didn't know details, he wasn't involved. But he'd heard rumors, facilities in the mountains, scientists working on continuation projects. Israeli intelligence filed this away. Seemed too crazy to follow up. Then in 1985, Mengele's bones were found in Brazil. He died in 1979, drowned while swimming. But investigators discovered something else. For 15 years, from 1960 to 1975, Mengele had been living in various small towns in southern Brazil and Paraguay. He'd been practicing medicine, seeing patients, particularly pregnant women, and in the towns where he'd stayed, there were unusual numbers of twin births. Coincidence? Maybe Mengele was still experimenting. Let's go back to 1944. Germany is losing the war. It's obvious to everyone. Hitler is detached from reality, still ordering offensives with divisions that don't exist. But his inner circle knows the truth. Martin Bormann, Hitler's private secretary and head of the Nazi Party, starts planning for what comes after. He doesn't plan for victory, he plans for survival. Operation Aktion Feuerland begins in August 1942, though it intensifies in 1944. The goal? Transfer Nazi wealth, technology, and personnel to South America, specifically Argentina and Paraguay. Why Argentina? Because Argentina in the 1940s was one of the richest countries in the world. More telephones than the rest of South America combined. World-class universities, a massive German immigrant population, and most importantly, its government was sympathetic. Juan Perón, who took power in a 1943 military coup, was openly fascist. He'd served as military attaché in Italy under Mussolini. He admired the Axis powers. His wife, Eva Perón Evita, had worked as a Nazi intelligence asset during the war, passing information about aid activities in South America. After the war, the Perón government welcomed Nazi refugees, gave them false papers, jobs, protection. It's estimated that between 5,000 and 9,000 Nazi war criminals fled to Argentina, including Eichmann, Mengele, Klaus Barbie, the Butcher of Lyon, Joseph Schwamberger, Erich Priebke, and hundreds more. But they didn't just come with suitcases, they came with resources. According to documents found in Argentine archives, Nazi-linked bank accounts in Switzerland and Argentina contained hundreds of millions of dollars. In today's money, that's billions. Gold from concentration camp victims, 12 kilos of pearls from Auschwitz, platinum, diamonds, stolen art, all transferred via U-boat, via diplomatic pouches, via networks of German expatriates and sympathetic officials. The Vatican helped, too, something called the Redlands, escape routes facilitated by Catholic clergy who saw Nazis as allies against communism. But Aktion Feuerland wasn't just about escape. It was about rebuilding. Southern Argentina, Patagonia, one of the most remote regions on Earth, harsh climate, sparse population, perfect for secrecy. In the late 1940s and early 1950s, German immigrants, many of them former SS officers, bought huge tracts of land in Patagonia. They established compounds. Self-sufficient communities, German-speaking, isolated from the outside world. One of the most notorious was Colonia Dignidad in Chile. Technically not Argentina, but similar setup, founded in 1961 by Paul Schaefer, a former Wehrmacht medic. Colonia Dignidad was officially a charity mission. In reality, it was a Nazi enclave. Survivors later testified that the compound conducted medical experiments, tortured political prisoners for the Chilean government, and abused children. Colonia Dignidad had a hospital, laboratories, even an airstrip. It remained operational until 1991, protected by the Chilean government because Schaefer provided intelligence services. In Argentina, similar compounds existed, less documented because Argentina has been better at hiding records, but declassified. FBI files from the 1950s mention research facilities in Bariloche, a city in Patagonia with a huge German population. CIA reports from the same period reference genetic programs continued by former SS medical personnel. What were they researching? According to one former resident who gave testimony in the 1990s, the compound in Bariloche had a clinic where pregnant women were given special vitamins and treatments. He said he saw doctors conducting what appeared to be artificial insemination procedures in the 1950s, decades before IVF became mainstream. He didn't know the details. He was a child, but he remembered German doctors, medical equipment, pregnant women coming and going. Could this be where the genetic experiments continued? Rehook number 2, 16 o'clock to 16:45. Now I know what you're thinking. This sounds like a conspiracy theory, like something from a movie. And you're right, it does. There was even a famous film about it, The Boys from Brazil, released in 1978. In that movie, Gregory Peck plays Mengele, and the plot involves him cloning Hitler, creating 94 identical boys, placing them in families designed to replicate Hitler's childhood. It's fiction, but here's the creepy part. The author Ira Levin based his novel on real rumors circulating in the 1970s. Rumors about Mengele in Brazil, about Nazi genetic research, about attempts to recreate the Fuhrer. And some of those rumors turned out to be partially true. Mengele was in Brazil. He was practicing medicine. He was interested in twins. So where does the truth end and the fiction begin? Let's dig deeper. First, let's talk about what was actually possible with 1940s science. Cloning, as in creating an identical genetic copy of a human, was pure science fiction in the 1940s. The structure of DNA wasn't even discovered until 1953. 8 years after the war ended, the first mammal clone, Dolly the sheep, didn't happen until 1996. So no, the Nazis could not clone Hitler. They didn't have the technology, but, and this is critical, they were working on the foundations. The Nazis were obsessed with genetics. They funded massive research programs. The Kaiser Wilhelm Institute for Anthropology, Human Genetics, and Eugenics received enormous funding. Ottmar von Verseur, Mengele's mentor, was director. He was conducting legitimate genetic research, studying heredity, twin studies, gene expression. The problem was his research was warped by Nazi ideology. He believed in racial hierarchies. He thought genetics could prove Aryan superiority, and his protege, Mengele, was providing him with an unlimited supply of human test subjects. After the war, von Verseur was briefly detained, then released. Why? Because his research was valuable. The Americans and Soviets both wanted Nazi scientists. Operation Paperclip brought over 1,600 German scientists to America, including some with questionable backgrounds. Von Verseur himself avoided prosecution, continued teaching, died peacefully in 1969. His research, including data from Mengele's twin experiments, was never fully destroyed or disclosed. So the question becomes, If Nazis with genetic expertise fled to Argentina, if they had funding, if they had secrecy, what could they have attempted? With 1940s, 1960s technology, here's what was theoretically possible. Selective breeding, absolutely. The Lebensborn program proved they could do this, encouraging specific people to have children together to produce desired traits. Artificial insemination. Yes, the first successful human artificial insemination was in the 1880s. By the 1950s, it was medically routine. Imagine Mengele or another Nazi doctor with frozen or fresh samples of sperm from SS officers, or even potentially preserved biological material from Hitler himself. They could have attempted artificial insemination to create children with specific genetic backgrounds, hormone treatments to increase twin births. Possibly there's some evidence that fertility drugs increase the chance of twins if Mengele understood the mechanisms. He could have attempted this. This might explain the twin phenomenon in Candido Godoy, not cloning, but deliberate manipulation to increase twin births, gene manipulation, or cloning. No, absolutely not with the technology available, but selective breeding over multiple generations? Yes. If you had the resources, the will, and the time, you could attempt to breed specific traits into a population. It would take decades. You wouldn't see results immediately, but theoretically, it's possible. Is this what the Patagonia compounds were attempting? We don't know for certain, but there are clues. In 2014, Argentine journalist Abel Basti published a book claiming he'd found evidence of Nazi genetic experiments in Bariloche. He interviewed elderly residents who remembered German doctors, secretive medical facilities, unusual births. One woman claimed her mother had been part of a breeding program in the 1950s, paired with a German man encouraged to have multiple children, given financial support. Her children were all blonde, blue-eyed, and she said there were dozens of families like hers. Basti's claims are controversial, not fully verified, but they align with other testimony. And then there's the Mengele connection, the one that ties everything together. In 2013, Argentine historian Jorge Camarasa published a book called Mengele, the Angel of Death in South America. He presented evidence that Mengele visited Candido Godoy multiple times between 1963 and 1965. He interviewed residents who remembered a German doctor who spoke broken Portuguese, treated pregnant women, gave them injections after his visits. The twin birth rate exploded. Brazilian geneticists investigated. They found no natural explanation, no genetic mutation in the population, no environmental factor. The town's twin rate remains unexplainably high to this day. Coincidence, or the last experiment of the Angel of Death? Let's separate fact from fiction. Fact. Operation Aktion Feuerland happened. Nazi wealth was transferred to Argentina via U-boat and other means. FACT. Thousands of Nazi war criminals fled to Argentina with government protection. FACT. Mengele lived in South America from 1949 until his death in 1979. FACT. Compounds with German populations existed in Patagonia. Some, like Colonia Dignidad, conducted medical experiments. FACT. Candido Godoy has an abnormally high twin birth rate that began around the time Mengele was in the area. FACT. The Nazis were obsessed with eugenics, conducted massive human experiments, and believed in creating a master race. Now here's what we don't know for certain. Unknown. Whether Nazi genetic experiments continued in Argentina after 1945. Unknown. Whether Mengele deliberately caused the twin phenomenon in Candido Godoy. Unknown. Whether there was an organized effort to clone or recreate Hitler. Unknown. The full extent of what happened in the Patagonian compounds. The problem is, Argentina sealed many of these records. Only in 2024 did they start releasing declassified files about Nazi activities. Those files confirm Mengele's movements, confirm Nazi financial networks, confirm protection by government officials, but they don't contain detailed information about what the Nazis were doing in Patagonia. That information either doesn't exist in records, or it hasn't been released yet, so we're left with testimony, circumstantial evidence, and a lot of unanswered questions. You might ask, why does this matter? It's ancient history. The Nazis lost. The war ended 80 years ago, but it matters for several reasons. First, because justice. Thousands of Nazi war criminals lived full lives in South America, protected by governments, never facing trial. Mengele died at age 67, swimming at a beach resort. He never faced justice for murdering thousands of children. Eichmann was caught and executed, but he was the exception. Most escaped. Second, because science, the experiments the Nazis conducted, while horrific and unethical, produced data. That data was used after the war by German, American, and Soviet scientists. There's a direct line from Nazi eugenics research to modern genetics. We need to acknowledge that, confront it. Understand how science can be perverted by ideology. Third, because it could happen again. Eugenics never really went away, it just got rebranded. Today we have genetic engineering, CRISPR, designer babies, pre-implantation, genetic diagnosis. We can now select embryos based on traits. We're close to being able to edit human genes. The technology the Nazis fantasized about? We're approaching it, and that raises the same questions they faced. Who decides which traits are desirable? Who gets access to this technology? What happens when we start designing humans? The difference, hopefully, is that we've learned from history. We have ethics boards, regulations, international agreements. But the temptation is still there. The desire to create better children, to eliminate disease, to enhance intelligence, to choose appearance. We're not so different from the Nazis in our desires, only in our methods and our ethics. So did the Nazis have a secret plan to clone Hitler? Probably not in the literal sense. They didn't have the technology, despite what movies suggest. But did they have a plan to continue their eugenic vision, to breed a master race, to use genetics to achieve what they couldn't achieve militarily? Yes, almost certainly the Lebensborn program proved their commitment. Mengele's experiments proved their willingness to sacrifice human lives for their vision. And Aktion Feuerland proved they planned for the long term. The Nazi vision didn't die in 1945. It went underground, it fled to Argentina. It adapted, and in some ways it succeeded. Not in creating a Fourth Reich, but in influencing how we think about genetics and human improvement. Eugenics was rebranded as genetics. Racial purity became genetic enhancement. Forced sterilization became genetic counseling. The language changed, the ethics improved. But the fundamental question remained. Should we try to improve the human species, and if so, how? Before you go, I want you to think about something. If you could edit your future child's genes, would you? If you could guarantee they'd be tall, intelligent, healthy, attractive, would you do it? Most people say yes to eliminating disease, but what about enhancing height, intelligence, appearance? Where's the line? That's the question the Nazis forced us to confront, and we still haven't answered it. If you think these questions matter, if you believe we need to remember history so we don't repeat it, then subscribe. Because we're going to keep exploring these uncomfortable truths. And here's my question for you. Do you think genetic engineering is eugenics under a new name, or is it fundamentally different? Leave your answer in the comments. Also, do you know other secret Nazi operations that continued after the war? Operations that sound like conspiracy theories but turned out to be real? Drop them in the comments. Your suggestion might become our next video. Thanks for watching, and remember, the scariest experiments are the ones that sound like they could never happen until they do.